Senator from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have the honor to represent the tip of America's spear, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Fort Bragg is the largest military installation in the United States, and it's the home to the most decorated combat forces in the military, the All-American Division, the 82nd Airborne. The 82nd is the subordinate command of the 18th Airborne Corps, America's global response force. Whenever a threat occurs, units of the 18th Airborne can be wheels up and on top of any target in the world in just 48 hours. In the 15 months that I've had the privilege to represent North Carolina in the Senate, I've made the readiness of the 18th Airborne one of my top priorities. In fact, you'd think it'd be everybody's top priority. But I've watched budget cutters in the Air Force slowly chip away at the ability of the commanders at Fort Bragg to adequately train their paratroopers at Pope Army Airfield. This year, the Air Force began dismantling the one Air Force tactical unit at Pope, the 440th Airlift Wing, capable of providing daily and ad hoc support for Fort Bragg soldiers. I said at the time that the removal of the 440th created unreasonable risk to the readiness of critical airborne units. They must be prepared to respond to a range of contingencies in very short time frames. I pointed out repeatedly that the deactivation of the 440th comes at a time when the nation is facing growing uncertainty and increasing threats abroad that could require a military response. And it's a response that only forces at Fort Bragg can fulfill. Over the last 7 years, the 440th has provided the Army with unparalleled support, tailored training opportunities without the tyranny of distance that comes through logistical, bureaucratic, and operational delays by having aircraft stationed somewhere else other than Pope Army Airfield. The Air Force leadership stated that after any deactivation of the 440th, out-of-state aircraft would support all airlift requirements for Fort Bragg units at Pope. The Air Force asked me to suspend disbelief. They told me to accept that it's more cost-effective for units to fly from Little Rock, Arkansas, or McCord Air Force Base in Washington State and support Fort Bragg down in North Carolina, rather than having planes stationed at Fort Bragg. I did my best to ensure that the Air Force understood the Army's requirements. And I promised them that if they removed the 440th, that I would be monitoring their progress and their ability to satisfy the Army's requirements for as long as I'm in the U.S. Senate. Well, the first warning signs that the Air Force was in trouble came in December at the annual Operation Toy Drop. Operation Toy Drop is the world's largest combined airborne operation down at Fort Bragg. The drop is actually daytime, non-tactical airborne operation supervised by foreign military jump masters. They view it as a rare treat to participate so that they themselves can get jump wings from a foreign country. This year's operation was purposefully designed by the Air Force to prove to Congress, to prove to me, that they could support the training mission at Fort Bragg. To prove the point, the Air Force Reserve went so far as to reduce the 440th's role in the operation. However, when the Air Force planes could not get to Pope because of weather, mechanical, or other delays, the 440th had to step in and make up the deficit, like they've done so many times before. This is the real world in action. Bad weather and mechanical problems happen. The Air Force knew this exercise happens every year. They knew it's highly visible, and they knew that they were under a microscope, and still they couldn't meet the requirement. In fact, during Operation Toy Drop, the 440th provided for about 40% of the chutes and 43% of the lift for the entire operation. Fort Bragg leadership has been clear to the Air Force in terms of their combat requirements, their training requirements at Fort Bragg. They've told the Air Force that they have to drop 10,000 paratroopers a month. 8,000 drops a month is considered the bare minimum for the 18th Airborne Corps. Sadly, the Air Force is not meeting those requirements. Only 6,100 paratroopers exited from Air Force planes in March. That is 300 fewer paratroopers dropped in February, which is 77% of the 8,000 sustainable threshold and 61% of the Army's overall requirement. Where I went to high school, 61% was a D- bordering on an F. They're failing. The Air Force has missed the Army's minimum jump requirements every month this year. These numbers are illuminating and concerning because in the Southeast, this is the best flying weather, January, February, March, best flying weather in the Southeast. What's going to happen when the Southeast thunderstorms and tornado season kicks in? If the Air Force can't meet Bragg's needs when the skies are clear, how's it going to do when the storm clouds gather? I hope the Air Force knows that I have their back as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. But in this case, this is about fulfilling the Army's requirement. This is about me having the Army's back. This is about making sure that the men and women who will be asked at a moment's notice to assemble on the green ramp at Pope Army Airfield and go wherever they must go to defend freedom and save lives, that they're at their highest state of readiness. But the performance to this point suggests that the Air Force is failing its customer service commitment to the Army. No business in America would be able to dictate to the customer how and when they're going to get their product. But that's exactly what's happening with the Air Force's relationship with the Army, and they're failing. So, Mr. President, I will ask Senator McCain to inquire as to whether or not the Air Force expects to meet the needs of the Global Response Force. They haven't done it in this first quarter. And this is the first quarter that they were trying to transition to a Pope Army Airfield without the 440th. And if they can't answer the question, then it is time for us to consider other options. Thank you, Mr. President, and I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call